You pay your HOA dues, you try to take care of your property, but then you get a fine for not pressure washing your driveway or your sidewalk. And that fine leads to more fines and then interest, and all of that accrues. And next thing you know, you can lose your house through foreclosure. That's what one family is dealing with right now. And I'm joined now by investigative reporter Anastasia Olmos. I'm Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe, and this is Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. Stassi, thanks for joining us.
Of course. I mean, that's the story here in Georgia. I feel like that's been a lead-in of a few of our Behind the Investigation talks so far. This one, particularly, a 77-year-old man who is now facing a possible foreclosure on his home because of his HOA dues and fees and things that got behind. Go ahead and take a listen or a watch to this story to hear the details.
The scene of the crime is this north-facing side of my house.
It's a scene that haunts George Watson more than 3 years later.
It's anxiety, it's sleeplessness, it's depression.
A slimy wall, a bucket, and a ladder.
I realized, I had been the architect of my own demise by not opening the mail.
The fines and legal fees, he estimates, now exceed $30,000.
It very possibly means that I'll lose the house.
But it's not the local police after Watson. It's his homeowners association.
This was the original newsletter that came the first year we were here.
George moved into the Cedar Lake Townhome subdivision in Kennesaw in 2001.
These were starter homes. I purchased mine out of a divorce. It was all I could afford. Everything I had is tied up in this house. All the equity I've got to show for my life.
He says he's had his share of disagreements with the HOA in the last 20 years, but now he fears he could lose everything.
During COVID, I developed a neurotic response to mail delivery. I literally just don't want to see mail.
George says when he checked the mail in late 2022,
I had a bill saying, you owe the HOA $6,000. Please send us a check. And I but for what?
He says he had no idea he'd violated any HOA rules, and then saw the other letters from July to September. Warnings and then fines to pressure wash the side of his home and to dump water out of a bucket, stating this breeds mosquitoes. And one in November for a ladder on the side of his house.
You cannot see anything on the side of the house.
The fines, $50 a day, equating to more than $1,500 a month, with 7% interest for 4 months. George says he borrowed a pressure washer from his neighbor, but didn't get to it until January of 2023. That's when the fines stopped. He says when he tried to negotiate with the board,
there was absolutely no attempt at all to talk to me. And then the knock at the door came.
It was July 2024. The HOA filed a judgment to foreclose on the lien they placed on his home to recover the money he owed, now more than $9,000. Georgia law allows an HOA to place a lien on a home for any amount. They can file to foreclose on the home when that amount exceeds $2,000.
I'm retired and living on a fixed income. Social Security, it amounts to about $20,000 a year. How am I going to pay if I lose the suit?
George says he took out an equity loan on his house to fight for it.
A year of anxiety and worry over the mounting legal costs because it's not over. I think it's added about 5 years of age to me.
Atlanta News First Investigates found George is the only homeowner in the Cedar Lake townhomes that the HOA has taken to court since 2008. But we did speak with several homeowners who said they've also had similar disagreements with the HOA. And when we went to ask the HOA president about George's case, she told us,
you would need to call our property management company
okay,
or our attorneys.
The management company, Tolly Community Management, told us in part that someone choosing not to read their mail is not an association issue. The covenants for the neighborhood state that the notice shall be sent by U.S. mail. For more insight, we sat down with attorney Randy Williams, who represents homeowners as well as HOAs in Metro Atlanta.
There are some times where you just need to tell your client, don't do that. So what are you going to do? You want to take their house? You probably could, but do you think that's the human thing to do to a 70, 80-year-old person
Instead, he recommends HOAs offer payment plans to people living on fixed incomes and points to a much cheaper solution, often found in the HOA bylaws, called self-help powers, letting the HOA board perform repairs or assist directly.
It would have been cheaper to either knock on his door or move the problem items to the back of his house.
I'm between a rock and a hard place, and there's nothing much I can do about it. This is not the way it's supposed to be for homeowners.
And I want to read you a statement that the management company, Tolly Management, said to us in full here. The association has given the owner every possible opportunity to the best of their knowledge to resolve the issue before it got this far. And then they go on to that quote, someone choosing not to read their mail is not an association issue. Now, the law firm that took on the case, which of course is now taking on the filing for the foreclosure, that is Lizega and Johansson, and they have not responded to any of our emails for comment.
Well, what about that argument of, because he said you keep getting that same letter and you just don't want to see it. It's happened to me. I understand it. But doesn't he have some due diligence in opening that mail to make sure he's staying up on the fines?
You know, it comes down to what is in the covenants, meaning what are in the rules of your HOA when you sign for that house, you sign into the HOA. So in those documents, it usually does say, especially in this community, that you will receive notices via written mail. And so that really gives you the obligation to check your mail. And, you know, one of Watson's concerns there was that, well, in this day and age, shouldn't things be emailed? Or, you know, even the attorney says, could you have just knocked on the door? That comes down to the board members and their preference of if they're going to do that. But whatever is in those covenants is really what the law is going to hold you to.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Is a lot of folks don't understand when you buy a home in an HOA, you are essentially endorsing and agreeing to those covenants and entering into them as essentially a legal contract. You're bound by the rules in there. And if it says written notice by mail, that's the way it's going to come, even if you may prefer another way. And ultimately, when this goes to court, that may really end up hurting him.
Correct. And, you know, with the negotiating part is those fines stopped at about 3 or 4 months. So really, when he got the mail and saw the fines, then he began to try to reach out. And maybe at that point, it was already past due. And as we mentioned, it's not just one fine. It was the pressure washing fine. And then it was you've had this ladder out or you've had this bucket out. And so it was kind of accumulating. And all of those fines do drop off there after 4 months. So the issues were remedied, but those fines were still on the ledger. And if you see closely on the video, 7% interest every month for several years, it can get out of hand fast.
And you can lose your home, which is amazing. I mean, they can put a lien on your home and then they can foreclose. It's over $2,000. Is that the amount?
Yeah, $2,000 is when they can file to foreclose.
Wow.
So that is in Georgia. If you're listening from out of state, every state has its own laws. But here in Georgia, you know, lawmakers have tried to bring this to the forefront here, especially in the Senate. They've tried to draft some bills and try to get votes. It hasn't gone anywhere, but I have attended some Senate hearings here in just the past couple weeks where they've started to talk about specifically the liens that HOAs can place on homes. Right now, as we mentioned, the $2,000 to file for a foreclosure. They want to raise that minimum to $4,000, and they want to ban the application of fines to that amount. So it can only be your dues if you're not paying your dues. But, you know, some people say that an HOA can use fines, you know, they can place a $100, $700 fine for one thing, and easily with 2 of those fines, 3 of those fines, you're now possibly going to lose your home.
And there's
so
no
cap that.
Yeah, there's no due process, though. I mean, the HOA board or its management company decides what those fines are, and unless there's some appeal process in the covenants, which there rarely are, you don't have any choice but to pay them or potentially lose your home under the current Georgia law.
Right. And you know what, Brendan, I would challenge you, you know, I know you've been on your HOA as well, the board. It is really a way that they hold some sort of power to get people to pay, because if there really is no consequence,
True.
Why are people going to pay out of all of their bills? So there really has to be some sort of checks and balances, and that's something that lawmakers are looking at. One of the things that they mentioned, it was specifically the Senate Rules Committee looking at a specific law, Senate Bill 361, and that bill would also give the Secretary of State the power to enforce things. So the HOA not only has to register with the Secretary of State, they've got to provide financial documents, which is huge because we get a lot of emails of people who have never been able to see their financial documents. George Watson, that was also one of his claims, is he's never seen where the money's going. And so the Secretary of State's office under this bill would get more power to kind of be that checks and balances system on both sides.
Well, you and I have talked about this, that the HOA board also operates by a set of rules, and it gets very wonky, but there's the covenants, which those bind all the neighbors. They're all bound to follow those rules. All the homeowners have to follow the rules in the covenants. But there's that other sort of document that's filed in a totally different place, not the Superior Court like the covenants, but filed with the Secretary of State. And those are essentially the corporate bylaws of the HOA. Can homeowners use those to show that the HOA hasn't been elected properly or hasn't been following its own rules on when holding annual meetings? And can that be used as a way to overthrow the board even?
Absolutely. I've talked to many homeowners who have done that, who are taking their bylaws to their HOA members and saying, you're not doing this. You didn't hold this vote. And in some cases, they're saying the HOA doesn't care. And in some cases, maybe the HOA board members just aren't aware of the way that things are supposed to be done. But bottom line, what we are finding is the oversight of even their own rules, the bylaws that were written at the creation of the HOA, whether it was a builder that did it or a management company. There's no oversight of them following those rules. And so people are having to take their HOAs to court themselves on their own dime. So that means they have to have the means to do that. And then second, the HOA can then pass on their own attorney's fees to the membership dues and assessments. So every homeowner in that community ends up paying for that lawsuit.
Wow, that's extraordinary. And then I know that sometimes in those covenants or in those documents, the founding documents, there's sometimes a process where you can essentially petition your neighbors, get enough of them to call a special meeting, and then get enough of them to vote the current board out.
Correct.
Is that something some of them are doing?
Yeah, so actually George Watson, he said years ago, he's lived there for 20 years or more, and he says that years ago he did do that. I believe it was around 2008 when a lot of the homes were facing possible foreclosure because people were not doing well, the economy was not doing well, and he said he did petition, he did get on the board, but he ended up having to leave it because of the people that were already on the board. He felt that they could not get along. He was trying to propose different things in terms of parking, and we couldn't go that far back and prove all of these different things. So we didn't include that in the story, but that was something that he did try to do and was successful at. But in the end, he felt that all odds were against him. There's another community that did do it. We had the story several months ago, and they did hold that special election. They voted in the new president, and the current president would not turn over anything. And so they filed a lawsuit, and they had been asking the judge to please enforce this. But, there's another issue I'm hearing is that it's been very difficult for people to actually serve these HOA boards and presidents.
Wow. I know you've been doing so many of these stories, and we've been getting lots of tips. And the reason seems to be there's this dynamic tension between people who want to maintain their neighborhood, want certain standards to be upheld. You don't want someone to paint their house stoplight yellow, or you don't want someone with a car up on blocks in the driveway, because that affects everyone's enjoyment and everyone's property value.
Yeah.
Also, you want to make sure if you're paying dues to take care of the pool or the tennis courts or just mowing the common area, you want to make sure everyone else is paying their fair share. That's one side of it. But the other side of it is, hey, I bought this home with my own money. I either paid cash or I have a mortgage, and the bank and I own this property, and who are you to tell me what I can do with it? Is that what you're seeing? Is those sort of highly emotional competing factors?
I would say the cases that we are looking at are a little bit more in depth than just the basic, don't tell me what to do with my home. There's a lot of people who want to do right, and they have paid thousands of dollars in fines and oh my gosh, I got a notice, let me fix it. But when the notices keep coming and they feel that it is discrimination in some of these neighborhoods where possibly there are people on the board that just don't like others, or one of the big things is that there's such a disconnect between the actual neighbors, the board members, and the homeowners that are being fined because of the management company in between that is possibly in a different state running hundreds of homeowners communities. So they're not talking to people one-on-one. And then in some communities, the fines, even the dues, all of that goes to a law firm once there's a past due fine or anything like that. And so now you're dealing with a lawyer who many people say they don't even know who it is. They don't know where the documents are going, and they don't even know there's a lien placed on their home. So it really is an in-depth, complex issue in some of these communities.
Well, and it's hard to deal with an attorney when you're not one, too. I mean, so it's like asymmetric warfare at that point.
Yep.
Fascinating.
Even just to understand some of the things going on in these neighborhoods, I've had to dig really deep and put on my lawyer hat. And I don't have a degree in law.
But what you do have is a stack of about 10,000 emails and tips we've received. I am hesitant to ask people to send you more, but if people do want to contact you, how would they contact you?
I actually created a form because when I took on this issue, there really were no real numbers, right? Because nobody had there's no oversight, there's nobody to collect these numbers, no state agency to go to and say, because I'd gone to the Attorney General's office, I said, how many complaints have you got? And they said, well, we don't oversee HOAs, and then trickle down effect, same with Secretary of State. And so I created a form to try to crowdsource information, and right now we're just under 100 responses, which is pretty huge for a couple stories and putting this form out there. But I'm asking people, how much do you owe? What are the fines for? Tell me about it. Give me, documentation. And we're not saying we're going to do these stories, but what I'm trying to do is get information so we can put numbers to the issue and take that to lawmakers.
And how do we get to that form?
That's on our website. That's going to be atlantanewsfirst.com. There's an investigates tab at the top, and if you click that, you can find an HOA story in kind of the rundown there, and any one of those is going to have a form. And here in a couple weeks, we'll have a special page that people can go to, and if you want to, go ahead and email me. I'll do my best to get back to you. That's anastasia.olmos@wanf.com.
Well, Stasi, thanks for staying on this story. And also, you're a bit modest because I know that lawmakers are listening and some of the actions they're taking are a direct result of your reporting. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning into Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. For more on this story, go to atlantanewsfirst.com and click on the ANF Investigates tab. You can listen to more award-winning investigations wherever you get your podcasts by searching Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First. And tune in Sundays for an hour-long episode of Uncovered, where we highlight some of our biggest investigations that impact our communities.